Hey there, welcome to Unwrapping Wine. I'm one of your hosts, Randall Voss.
And I'm Ann Zwink.
Today we have Josie Boyle from Mousse Winery in Minnesota, and she's going to talk a little bit about her background and her specialization in sparkling. So thanks for joining us, Josie.
Thanks for having me.
So how'd you get into this whole wine world, Josie? I mean, what's your story to get into this?
I actually started in Iowa. Randall, you were one of the first people I met actually in the wine world when I first started back in around 2007. I was working as a librarian and I was looking around for something to do because I had some free time, and I found the Des Moines Area Community College class, basically a wine 101 class, and thought it sounded interesting. So I took that class, started to learn more about, it was all about wine making, grape growing, wine and food pairing, all the wine regions of the world. It was really interesting. And one of the students before me had gone to New Zealand, and I thought that was really sounded fascinating. And she worked at a winery down there. And so I was like, well, I want to do that too. So I ended up just continuing taking courses. And a couple years later, I did end up going to New Zealand and quitting my job as a librarian. And the rest is history. I grew up in Stillwater, Minnesota. So I'm from Minnesota originally, in between Iowa and moving back to Minnesota. So I worked in New Zealand for a harvest. And then I got a job at Mauby Vineyards in Michigan, in the Traverse City area. And they only make sparkling wines there. And so before that time, I thought sparkling wines were pretty good. You know, champagne is nice, but you don't really gain a real appreciation for sparkling wine and the styles unless you're like drinking it every day and making it. And so that's what happened. I just kind of fell in love with styles, all kinds of sparkling wines, and eventually I worked there a couple years learning how to make traditional method and Charmat method wines. And eventually I got homesick and moved back to Minnesota with the dream of starting my own sparkling winery in Minnesota using Minnesota grapes. So while I was in Iowa, my first education was really in using Midwest grapes. So it was my education wasn't about making wine out of Chardonnay and Cabernet necessarily. It was Marquette and these different varieties that were growing in Iowa at the time and Minnesota. So there's always been talk about how our Minnesota varieties could make really nice sparkling wines. And I really wanted to try my hand at that and do it, just, make sparkling wines out of Minnesota grapes. So that's a little bit about my background.
That's awesome. So you said New Zealand and then Iowa first, and then New Zealand, and then
Yes.
Michigan,
Yep.
and then back to Minnesota. And in Minnesota, you worked for a couple places, and now you've started your own company called Mousse.
Yes.
And that's more than we think, right? It's more than just a moose with antlers, or is it just a moose with antlers?
No, it's a moose with the antlers, but also when you spell it Mousse, it means the bubbles that rise to the surface of a glass of champagne or sparkling wine. So similar to like the head on a beer, it's the mousse on a champagne or sparkling wine. So
you don't actually see moose walking by your winery on a daily basis?
No,
Okay.
I hope to get like a nice rack of moose antlers in the tasting room at some point, but no, there's nothing really other than that, other than it sounds like the animal. But yeah.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about how how opening your own business was, because you opened in 2020. Is that right?
Yes. So, yeah, like I had mentioned, when I moved back to Minnesota, that in 2012, I had this dream of opening my own winery. So it had been, in my mind, in the works for a few years. But I had to get a job and worked at another winery in the meantime. But yeah, so let's see, in 2019, I really started in earnest with like writing my business plan and, trying to find a location for the winery and, finding a bank that could give us loans and all of that. So yeah, 2019 was basically all just, working on how to start the business. And so it did take, actually, I think I maybe started in 2018, but it took a while to get everything together. We eventually found this building right in downtown Jordan. It's a city just about 35 minutes southwest of Minneapolis. It's a fairly rural town, but close enough to the cities that it's just a nice little day trip to come down and visit us. But anyway, so we found the location. We're going to buy the building, got a bank on board, all of that. And so we closed on our loans in December of 2019 and then started construction in January of 2020 with the idea of opening later in 2020. And of course, everything, the world went crazy and turned upside down a little bit. But, the wheels were in motion and we just had to do it. So we ended up opening in September of 2020. And yeah, it was kind of a crazy time. I wanted to concentrate just on the winemaking piece of it rather than grape growing and winemaking. So we're kind of a wine cafe, wine bar feel here. But one of my requirements for our location, even before 2020, was I wanted like a nice patio because us, we in the Midwest, we love our patio season.
All 2 months of it.
Yeah, right. We'll take what we can get. Our building is actually on a really nice big lot. And so we had a patio, which really saved us because, yeah, and we were super busy those first couple months too. It was kind of crazy, but yeah, we did tastings. People bought glasses of wine, bottles of wine, and we got through it that way.
One thing I think, to me, in your situation, it's really smart to just do one thing. It's tough to do both the winery and vineyard, I would guess. First of all, it's like two different skill sets, right? I mean, growing grapes is very different from making wine. So I think in your situation, that probably,
for sure.
Yeah, that made a lot of sense to keep it simple. So yeah.
Yeah, and they're two different businesses, right? Like you can have basically two different sets of books and everything, business models basically for it. So I just didn't want to complicate my life more than it had to be. So
a lot of people assume if you're a winemaker, you're a grape growing expert and vice versa. And that's, yeah, there are some people that are, but those are two very different skill sets too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Josie, you make a sparkling wine in a pét-nat style. I don't think everyone is familiar with what pét-nat is. Could you explain a little bit about what pét-nat is?
So pét-nat is like a minimally processed, almost rustic way of making sparkling wine. It's where we take the juice from the grapes, put it in a tank, start the fermentation. Basically, towards the end of that fermentation, when there's still a little bit of sugar left that hasn't been turned into alcohol, we bottle it right from the tank. And so that fermentation actually finishes in the bottle. And so it ends up like, I find that it's like very fresh and fruity and ends up being just, kind of carries that fruitiness from the juice into the wine. And it's, yeah, just, a lot of natural wines are made like that. And so we don't process it, it's not filtered, it's not stabilized like other wines are.
Is there a certain grape variety that works for that specifically, or can you do that with anything, or how does that work?
I think some varieties might work better than others, but I have done it with a few different varieties. This is I think it's the third year now that I've made one from Itasca. And what I really like about Itasca is that it does have a little bit lower acid than the other grape varieties. So, and that's beneficial because, basically you're going to end up with a dry wine. If the fermentation finishes clean and there's like really no residual sugar left in the bottle, which may or may not happen, but you got to anticipate that it's going to finish in the bottle. So like, you don't want the acid too high in the wine to kind of be off balance. So I've found that Itasca has worked really well for that style because it is a little bit lower acid and it has just really nice aromas. But I've used Frontenac Gris and Frontenac Blanc, like a harder press juice fraction, and that turned out really nice too. That was the first one I made. But yeah, I think you can use a lot of different grapes with it. I made a hard cider, an apple cider this year. I did it in a pét-nat style, and it turned out really nice. And it's just a nice dry cider, and yeah,
that sounds delicious. So you're saying it's a rustic style, so it's not like a Minnesota specific style.
No, it's actually kind of, well,
anywhere,
it's been
right?
kind of trendy. You'll find pét-nats made sort of all over the world.
Okay.
But it's kind of trendy because since it's minimally processed, and a lot of winemakers who make pét-nats, like they don't actually add commercial yeast. It's like a wild fermentation. And so you kind of never know what you're going to get. But no, I actually don't know many winemakers at all around here that are making wines into the pét-nat style so far. I'm sure more and more will.
So you're saying you're a trailblazer.
I try to be, yeah. Yeah, man.
What other styles of sparkling do you make?
So I kind of do it all. So forced carbonation, which is where you just take a base wine and you put it in a closed tank and inject carbon dioxide into it. We make Charmat style or tank fermented wines, which is also the way that Prosecco is made. So that's where we take the base wine that's been, filtered and finished and stabilized. We add additional yeast and sugar to it and put it into that closed tank and let the yeast eat the sugar and create the bubbles. And then from there, we filter the wine to make it nice and clear. And at this point, it's bubbly. And then we just use our filler to fill the bottles and finish it that way. And then the final way of making sparkling wine is the champagne method. And that's similar to the Charmat method, except that we take that base wine, add the yeast and sugar, and bottle it. And then in the bottle, in each individual bottle, the yeast creates the bubbles. And that wine we aged for the longest. That wine's aged for, I like to age it for at least a couple of years. And the yeast cells break down in the bottle and impart flavors. Basically the wine is sitting on those yeast cells. And you can think of it like it's the same yeast variety or yeast species, I should say, as like for bread making and beer making. And so, you get those like toasty bread, like sweet bread notes in the wine just because those yeast cells are breaking down over time and infusing the wine with those wonderful flavors. So that's why champagne is so much more complex and full-bodied than, say, a young forced carbonated wine.
Okay. Your 2022 La Crescent was named the best of show sparkling at the 2023 Cold Climate Wine Competition in Chanhassen this year.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that wine? Can you talk about what grape variety you used, where the fruit came from, which of those sparkling methods you used for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really exciting. That was a fun award to win. And that, it's funny because it was like a wine that almost wasn't, because I didn't plan on making a varietal La Crescent. So La Crescent is the grape variety. It is one of the University of Minnesota grapes that have come out of their grape breeding program. So in the past, I haven't gotten a lot of it. I haven't gotten enough grapes, the La Crescent grapes themselves, to make its own batch, and to make a varietal wine from it. So I didn't plan on doing that in 2022, except for the fact that my one vineyard that grows La Crescent for us, like, they had a bumper crop. It was like their biggest crop ever of La Crescent. So I ended up with a lot more wine than I had anticipated. And I kind of let it sit. It was sitting in a tank for a while I was finishing other wines. And eventually it was just, tasting it, I thought, this is actually really good. It's a really nice wine just on its own. So I ended up just bottling it by itself. It's 100% La Crescent. This one, and it's like 100% stainless steel, nothing super fancy, was done to the wine itself. And it was actually it was forced carbonated. So it was, it didn't have that extra yeast influence. It was really purely the grape, and wine, aromas from the wine that are coming through.
Josie, what is probably your favorite grape variety to make sparkling out of? So let's say you're doing the traditional method, the method Champenoise. What is your favorite grape to make that out of, or any method? What do you really like to work with?
I really like Frontenac Blanc. I think it's a nice grape to work with. It has the aromas are more of like the white fruits, and they're just nice aromas. And it has, the acid is fairly manageable in the wine as well. So Frontenac Blanc has been kind of my workhorse for all the styles, really, but it does take well to champagne method. But I did bottle some Itasca, just 100% Itasca, a small batch for Drew Horton at the University of Minnesota Research Center. He's the research winemaker there. I bottled a little bit of Itasca for him, just for their research, and I tried it, and that was about a year and a half ago. I tried a bottle this past summer, and it was really good. So I put some of our Itasca into a small batch of traditional method, champagne method, bottle fermentation. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping that'll turn out. So Itasca is one grape I'm really liking. All of the other varieties are nice. I use Marquette and Frontenac. Those are two red grapes to make our rosé. And they're nice grapes. They have a lot of color. So, our rosés tend to be darker in color than your typical rosés from other regions of the world, which, may or may not matter. I go back and forth on whether I don't care or do care about the color of my rosé, but yeah, but those are nice as well. A little bit higher acid. Frontenac Gris is a nice one too. It adds some sort of herbal notes. It's more like grassy sometimes, I feel like, if you pick it early for sparkling. It has a lot of apricot and peach notes. But Frontenac Gris is nice in a blend. The one I haven't worked with too much. I got a tiny little amount, maybe 500 pounds last year, of Petite Pearl, which is a Tom Plocker variety. And I just pressed it off and made a rosé out of it. And of course, it was only like 20 gallons or something. So I blended it away. But before I did, I bottled a little bit just as a rosé, and that one is really nice. And I think it has some potential. If I get a little more of it, I definitely want to work with that one too.
And don't you guys make a Petite Pearl rosé?
Yeah, we make a Petite Pearl rosé. We love Petite Pearl for rosé, and the comments that you're making, it's lower in acid. It has really delicious watermelon notes and really yummy summery fruit notes. We're a huge fan of it.
You mentioned that the rosés you make from these hybrid grapes tend to be darker than what people are used to. Is it the amount of pigment? Is it the shade of pigment? How are the rosés from these grapes that you're using different than maybe the vinifera?
Yeah, well, so Marquette and Frontenac are Teinturier varieties, so their flesh is actually red, as opposed to just the skin. If you break open say a Pinot Noir grape or a Cabernet Sauvignon grape, inside the flesh is actually white, and so the juice is going to be white if you can press it off really quickly without much breaking up the skins, because the pigment is in the skins of those traditional vinifera European varieties. But for us, the grape is red all the way through. So even though I whole cluster press, and that means I just throw stems and all, just throw the grape clusters into the press and press it right away, that juice is going to come out dark pink to even, like a light red wine towards the end of pressing. It's really hard to make a light rosé, and you really can't make a light rosé out of 100% of Marquette or Frontenac. You really have to blend a white wine into it to dilute that color.
I know what you're talking about. We definitely have a rosé that we call it's pink, and everybody gets confused because they say, no, it was definitely a red wine.
Yeah, yes.
But it's pressed off the skins immediately. There's just so much color in our grape varieties. It's hard to come by a variety in our regions that is like that nice light coral pink color or peachy pink. Like, that's so rare, don't you think?
Yes, yes.
And every time I see one, I ask the winemaker, how did you do that?
Right.
How did you make a pink wine?
I know. Yes. It's yeah, it's a challenge. I have a lot of rosé in tank just because it's we have a lot of color in our wines.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have found the Petite Pearl tends to be a little bit lighter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one that we found too.
I'm sure other regions of the world are wishing they had more color. So maybe maybe we could donate some.
Yes, trade and acid too. I wouldn't mind giving up a little bit of acid.
Yeah, we'll make a trade.
So Josie, why sparkling in Minnesota? Why you had an interest in sparkling to begin with, but why do you think sparkling in Minnesota are a good fit?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good fit because our grape varieties, like I've been saying this whole time, is they have higher acid. Like, the acid in the grapes is something to be managed, that needs to be managed. One way to balance the acidity in a wine is to add bubbles instead of, a lot of early on, I feel like a lot of winemakers balance the acid with sugar. And so our natural, like the grapes themselves are very naturally fruity and just smell sweet. But then when you like add sugar to the wine itself, you just make a really sweet wine. And I know a lot of wine drinkers like sweet wines, but a lot of wine drinkers don't. So, just another way of balancing that acid instead of adding a bunch of sugar is to add bubbles and make the wine sparkling. And so for me, it's just a great way, like a really nice style that allows you to make a drier wine out of our grapes while still having that acid in balance. And, around here up to this point, we're the only winery in Minnesota who's focusing on sparkling wine and making it our specialty. So it's another differentiator for us. And because, there's a lot of good wineries around us, but no one has 9 sparkling wines on their menu right now. So
okay, you have nine on your
ten.
menu.
At least, yeah.
And the bulk of your bubbly is blends. Is that your main way of approaching it?
Yes, it's yes. Up to this point, it's mainly been blends. Partly because we are pretty small and our growers are actually, have fairly small vineyards. So it's kind of a practical thing. Like some of the varieties that we've gotten, like I just have to put the wines together because there's not enough of one thing to make into just its own wine. But it's also, each variety has its own characteristics and each wine in a tank has its own specific qualities that when you blend it together can make the final, the blend better than each individual wine on its own. So a lot of my wines are blended, yes.
What I like about how you name your wines is that it's very clear what they are. It's dry this, sweet this, and so there is no ambiguity to the consumer what it is.
Yeah, I mean it's
Could you give an example of how you've named them?
From the very beginning, I wanted it. I'm not someone who like names things. Like I don't name my car, I don't name my tanks, I name like the pumps. So for me, like naming it, we have a cat at home that we call Orangey because he's orange. It's not.
You're very literal, you're saying.
Very literal. I'm very literal.
I appreciate
Goldie
that.
the goldfish.
So yeah, so like from the very beginning we had, like our dry white bubbly. Like our dry white bubbly that's what it is. It's bubbly and it's dry and it's white. So that's what we're gonna call it. We have a sweet rosé bubbly, sweet white bubbly. Those, for better or worse, we had to come up with a name, and I feel like it's just putting what it is on the label helps people know what's in the bottle.
Nothing wrong with that.
I love that idea. I think that's fantastic. And then you don't need a sweetness scale.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. But we also have I've also done kind of a play on colors too. So we have a few of our labels are just named after colors. Like we do have a Rosso, which is like our first year we made it from Frontenac, and it was kind of like our version of a Lambrusco. So like a kind of a sweet red carbonated wine. We just called Rosso, an homage to an Italian sparkling wine, red wine. we have our Blanc, Rosé, and Oro. Oro means gold. Those are our traditional method wines. They have a little bit different label, but those are all, of course, colors.
If you were to introduce someone to sparkling, say from your wine list or something like that, how would you approach a person that is new to sparkling? What would you get them started on and why?
Yeah, well, I kind of like to first just ask what kinds of wines they like to drink. If they are, if they like a little bit sweeter wines or a little bit drier wines, I typically tend to start with our dry white bubbly, our rosé bubbly, or our sweet white bubbly. All of those are made in the Charmat method. So they're kind of in the middle as far as like, complexity. They're made like a Prosecco. And I feel like Prosecco is a very easy drinking sparkling wine. It's tends to be pretty approachable. So if they like to drink a little bit drier wines, I point them to the dry white bubbly. It's a nice, crisp, clean, just classic sparkling wine style. If they like a little bit sweeter, start with the sweet white bubbly. Just a little bit more sugar in there, a little bit more, fruit forward. That's where I'd start. Although if someone comes in who is really a fan of just loves champagnes, then we can start right with our traditional method wines. Those wines really are more full-bodied. They have a lot more yeast influence, and they're just going to have more different aromas than the other ones. More yeast characteristics. So those wines aren't for everybody, but if you like champagne, like I think you will like ours.
That seems like it would be a really great mix. I think of champagne style, méthode champenoise style wines as very complex, lots of different things going on, primary aromas and secondary aromas and tertiary aromas, right, and really fine bubbles. And they're really, there's a reason that they're super classy. Mm-hmm. However, the varieties that we're growing, I think, can be suited to lots of the more juicy type of styles. Right. So just seeing our juicy grape varieties. When I say juicy, I just mean they have so much aroma. Yes. And they make you think of like fresh juice. They would just want to drink sweet even. So having that combined with these really fine, complex secondary and tertiary aromas in a méthode champenoise, I think would just be phenomenal.
And it is a balance too, because traditionally you don't necessarily want, or, in Champagne, they pick the fruit a little bit less ripe so that there aren't as many like juicy, fruity, aromas coming from the wines. And so for me, part of the process of figuring out which tank, which lot of wine is going where is this lot, like some of the lots that aren't quite as aromatic are going to go towards the Champagne method wines for me. And some of the more aromatic wines are going to go to the force carbonated, like the light, sweet, fruity wines. Just because I do think about it like, I don't know, more of like, I want the toast characteristics coming through, but I think you make a good point. I mean, it's like having all of that in the glass, like the juicy and fruit and like, like biting into I don't know, cherry pie or something, or like peach pie, is really, really interesting. Or like in the Blanc, like our Blanc, which is just a white traditional method wine. It's made from Frontenac Gris, Frontenac Blanc, and Le Crescent, I believe. That one is like lemon meringue pie. And It's got like some zesty citrusy notes to it, along with kind of like a pie crust type yeast note. I don't know.
Yum.
But yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
so good.
So it is like very different than, just Chardonnay or Chardonnay and
Mhm.
Pinot Noir. Like they're just so aromatic that it's like, is that detrimental to this style? But I don't know. I don't think it is. It's just different. It's just, creates
Yeah.
new flavors.
Yeah. It's not detrimental. It's just different. I like that a lot. And that's the whole purpose of our grape varieties. I mean, they're just, everybody should be trying them
Yes.
because they're different
Yeah.
and fun and new.
Right. Yeah. And like how I kind of think about it too is like taking traditional winemaking methods. So, making an orange wine out of La Crescent, like seeing what La Crescent does as an orange wine, or Frontenac Gris as an orange wine, or, using the champagne method and using our grape varieties and seeing what they do, making a pét-nat out of Petite Pearl. Like, what is it going to be? Like, it's very, like, we can take inspiration from other regions with our grapes and make some really phenomenal wines. Yeah, and really interesting new wines that no one has ever tried before, which is very cool. It's fun to try new things. So
Pioneer, trailblazer, Josie Boyle.
So Josie, are there any other cool things that you guys are doing that you want to share?
We did do a 12 days of bubbly advent calendar.
Ooh.
This is our fourth. Actually, we've done it every year. This is our fourth year. But that's been fun throughout the year, we bottle pretty much every one of our lots of sparkling wine. We bottle in half bottles and save them up for the holiday season and put them in a nice gift box and call it our 12 days of bubbly. And so you get like a nice variety, 12 different sparkling wines.
That sounds delicious. So where can we
Yes.
go and order that? Are you shipping everywhere? Will you ship to Iowa?
We ship to Iowa. We actually sold out this year. I'm kind of bummed because I should have made more.
Yeah.
I'll have to make more next year. But we sold out, but that's always a fun thing to look forward to for the holidays is our 12 days of bubbly. So look for it next year.
You're basically teasing people because
I know
you're promoting this and you don't even have it anymore.
I don't even have anymore. Just
we're
put
so
it on your
popular.
calendar
We don't even have
year.
it anymore.
We could technically still do a 12 days of bubbly just with full bottles, right? I mean,
well,
just
with
more
full
wine.
bottles, you could.
That doesn't
It's a
seem
full
like a
case.
problem to me. That sounds like
It's a full case, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not really a problem, but
So your website is moussewinery.com. Is that correct? Or?
Yep. Yes, you can find us at MOUSSE winery.com, mousewinery.com, and we're on Facebook and Instagram at Mousse Winery.
So we'll be making a trip up to Jordan, Minnesota soon, right, Randall?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, please do.
And my wife and 4 children come too.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll have to run it by them first, but yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
We'll be there.
We do have an Airbnb on the second floor. We have a couple of apartments on the second floor of the building. So one of them's renting out as an Airbnb if you need a place to stay.
Wow.
Man, I have no excuse not to now.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Well, thank you, Josie.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you, Josie, so much for being on our podcast.
Thank you. And I appreciate you spreading the word about our Midwest grape varieties and new wines to try because it's always, like I said, it's always fun to try new wines, and there's a lot of good wines out there now.
So true.
And drink bubbly.
Thanks for listening. Check out Unwrapping Wine Podcast on Facebook and Instagram for information about the show, upcoming episodes, and to provide feedback. Episodes will be coming out every other week.